All right, so this is a continuation from yesterday's video. The video was why people go from New Age into Jesus. And when I was recording this video yesterday, I got to the end of my memory chip. So the video, suddenly cut off when I was about to go into sharing some of my perspective and personal story with how I've been, how I was working with the occult. And then I even had my own moments where it almost felt a little bit enticing to kind of flip the script and then go in the complete opposite direction. You could say turn towards Jesus. Now, obviously, this is not something that I did, and it's not something that I truly resonate with at my core. That's why I didn't do it. But I could tell that there was many parts inside of my system that wanted to make that switch, and I can also reflect back and see why that was the case. So once again, this is just a part 2 to yesterday's video. So for those of you that found interest in that video, here is your part 2. So where it cut off was me basically mentioning how when I was working with the occult, I was specifically working with some of the darker aspects of it. There's many reasons why I was working with that aspect of the occult. A lot of it had to do with repressed trauma, and it was a way that it was more of like an unconscious way that I was starting to surface that trauma. That was one of the main reasons why I was working with the darker occult. Because, a lot of people don't understand that when you're working with those types of psychic sciences and you're doing it from a place of development and a place of wanting to truly know yourself, it is one of the fastest roads to understanding what is buried inside of your unconscious or what's stuck inside of your system that relates to negative, darker energy. There's no better place to go than towards the darker aspects of occultism. For example, the clip-off. It is one of the most, I will forever stand by this, it is the most powerful form of initiation when it comes to facing your shadow. Tried and true. I guarantee you this. Now, that wasn't really the main driver of why I was working with it. There was a lot of repressed trauma that was making me want to better protect myself and become more powerful and get myself to a place where I'll never be abused again and that I'll have a bunch of money and I'll be this, this idealized version of myself that I always thought I needed to be worthy. That was a big driver of why I went down that road. But once again, at a more spiritual level, it was because there was a lot of trauma that I needed to heal, and that specific path was the perfect path to go down to help me rediscover who I actually am again. So my point was, I went really deep with the occult. I went super deep in 2018, and I want to say around 2024-ish is when I started to kind of take a little bit of a step back. You could even say the beginning of 2023-ish is when I started to actually realize that potentially the energies that I'm working with are not what I think they are. So as I was mentioning, in the previous video, is I was associating the entities that I was connecting with, like all the demons and the angels and things like that. In some ways, I was associating these energies with some form of like extraterrestrial consciousness. And I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater either. I 100% know and believe extraterrestrials play a significant role when it comes to connecting with spirits and with entities. Ultimately, the reason why I believe this to be true is because I believe ETs, the ones that are able to have interstellar travel, these ones are interested in our development as humans. And they want us to heal our nervous systems so that we can have better contact with them. Because when they support our process, that helps us to take better care of ourselves and also our planet. And that has a ripple effect in our solar system as well as the galaxy at large. So it becomes an overarching positive influence. This is my belief. This is why I think ETs play a big role in our evolution as humans. But of course, once again, when it comes to spirits, when you're starting to work with psychic energies or psychic practices that have to do with the spirit realm, there are ETs that also have access, very conscious access to these different spiritual planes too. And they can sort of influence spirits to visit you or to contact you based on what spirit you need to connect with that reflects something inside of you that maybe you're not seeing. So in other words, spirits, once again, they're not separate entities all on their own. When I'm talking about angels and demons and things like that, they don't have their own soul, so they don't have their own separate existence. Rather, they are reflections of our own being, whether that's a positive or a negative reflection. And they're able to help us see things that potentially are much deeper in our unconscious. So when you're communicating with a demon or you're communicating with an angel, you're actually communicating, yes, with an archetypal energy that does have its own consciousness, but its consciousness is not separate from you, and it is also a direct reflection of something deeper down in your system too. So it is not an external soul being. It is just an archetype of consciousness that is psychic in its nature, that also has its roots in some different aspect and or parts of yourself. So I used to have the belief that angels and demons were like literal extraterrestrials that had their own existence and their own planets that they lived on, and that they could literally like physically manifest and visit, and we could have like a real conversation with them in the human form. And that is not completely true. Once again, because they're not separate from self. They are archetypes existing in the spirit plane that are there to help us better discover ourselves. So long story short, I started to become more aware of this as time went on. It was pretty much 2022 is when I was seriously led to stop connecting with the spirits that I was connecting with on a consistent basis. So from 2018 to 2022, I was doing invocations every single day, multiple times a day. 2022, I had this really big revelation that this was no longer something that I needed to do anymore. And you could say it was because I integrated something inside of my system. And all of those different spirits, a lot of them were the darker entities that at the time I was connecting with, because they were reflections of parts of me that I was repressing and that were rooted in deeper negative energy. Once I had integrated that energy to a certain point, there was no longer a need to have to keep connecting with those demons that were reflecting that negative energy inside of my body. Now, I didn't fully know this at the time. I didn't understand this But I just had this intuition that I didn't need to do invocations anymore. And not only that I didn't need to, it was actually important for me to stop. So I did. And it's not to say that I stopped for good, but I stopped doing it in such a way that I was doing it every single day. And then it was about 2023 where I was going through my health issues. And, this was also because there was still a lot of trauma that was in my body that was finally starting to come up, but I was still really resistant to it. So I was afraid to really feel it. I was afraid to go into my deeper vulnerability. I was afraid to really become who I am truly meant to be. Just in essence, that's pretty much what it was. And because I was still resisting the energy, the emotions that were coming up in my body, and at the time I was also in a relationship with someone that was just a reflection of a codependency and further distraction from what was going on internally. I had manifested health issues, and those health issues stemmed from mold poisoning, and that almost literally killed me in 2023, basically towards the end of 2022 and towards the very beginning of 2023. And there was points where I tried to connect with my spirit guides, during this time, and my health was getting worse and worse and worse. So I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I know these spirits are real because the way that I've connected with them and that I'm communicating with them is very real, and I'm seeing manifestations of synchronicity and correspondences that are showing me that what I'm doing is actually working and that it's 100% happening. But potentially what I'm thinking these things are isn't actually what I've been thinking they are, because why are they not helping me? Why is my health getting worse and worse and worse when I'm connecting more and more and more with these different spirit guides? And I'm approaching it from a place of intending to be better, intending to be healthier. So that was like my big point of confusion, where I'm like, well, it's like the spirit guides, they help me make money. Like I was able to use them to make money, and build my business and do what I loved to do at that time for a living. And that was all wonderful, but all of that stuff becomes meaningless when you're physically ill and you feel like you're going to literally die. So the demons were able to help me do all that kind of stuff. But when it came to helping me improve my improve my health, I couldn't improve my health. And as I said, this was a huge point of confusion for me, because I was like, why would they not help me with this? So as you can see, my approach was like dependent on them to do something for me. And keep in mind, these entities, these spirits, these demons, they were never separate from me. They were always these aspects of consciousness that did exist in the psychic realm, but they were reflections of energy that was already in myself from the start. So the reason why I was able to grow a business and I was able to make money and I was able to quote unquote curse people if I needed to curse people at the time, and the reason why these things would work was because I was working with my own deeper unconscious. It was as if I was controlling my inner state and my inner parts of me through psychic practices and through ritual that then led to external results. So when I was controlling this negative, darker energy in my system, for example, let's say a wound of unworthiness or a wound of abandonment, and I found a way to control that energy through the idea and concept of a demon, that actually helped me to override potentially my own intuition and my instincts, and then pushed me to do things that maybe I wouldn't have done if I was actually being myself. And those things that I was doing, you could say that I was creating contracts and commitments with literally parts of my own psyche. So I know that when it comes to the spirit realm, the spiritual community and the occult community and people that are into more of the left-hand path and the darker occult sciences, you think you're making contracts with demons and commitments to demons, and that as long as you meet your end of the bargain, then they will manifest whatever it is that you're wanting to manifest. And on one, from one perspective, that is true, but you're making contracts and you're making commitments with protector parts of you. Okay, so remember, the protective parts of yourself that were formed through fragmentation and trauma from most likely early childhood trauma that you went through, these protector parts are not separate from the demons you're connecting with. Yes, the demons can take on a more generalized archetypal consciousness, but when that demon interacts with self, it filters through your protector. It filters through a more intimate, personalized part of you specifically. This is why there's tons of different spiritual practitioners that can work with the same entity, yet have every one of them have very different experiences. There's similarities oftentimes, like archetypal correspondences, but also pretty significant subjective differences. And those subjective differences are based on your unique nervous system state, makeup, and essentially speaking, your trauma history. Especially when you're working with demons, because demons resonate with negative energy. So all of the negative energy in your body that is unresolved from your trauma, that is what resonates with demons. Now, depending on if you're going to control that energy and try to manipulate it and coerce it to do things for you, or if you're going to honor it and be present with it and get curious about it from a place of, I want to process this and release it from my system so I no longer have to carry this in my body. So the approach that I was doing for a good amount of time was I was manipulating, controlling, and managing this energy through the concept of working with demons, which was actually me just working with these parts of me, these protector parts of me, and kind of building contracts with them and agreements. And I was able to manifest things that made me feel worthy. Remember how these protective parts of ourself operate. They protect us from the emotional pain of our core wounds. So if I'm working with a protector part of me to say, I need more money because if I get more money, then this will make me worthy, then this part of me is like, hell yeah, let's do it. Here, go ahead, connect with this demon that represents me, make a contract with it, and in truth, you're making a contract with me, and we will override your system to the point where we will override your system to the point where your intuition, your instincts are not going to be clear, and we're going to make money at whatever cost it is that we need to. So we're going to basically promote behavior and ideas that potentially is against my integrity to be able to make this money so that I can feel worthy, so that I don't have to feel the core wound. And that's how these, a lot of these protective parts of ourself actually do operate. And they're not doing it because they're evil. They're just stuck in their roles from your early childhood. They're doing whatever they know how to protect you from these core wounds in the past. That's how our survival mechanisms work. So this is what I was doing. This is why I could manifest money. This is why I could manifest a relationship where I was in control of everything. This is why I could manifest a lot of the things that I was manifesting, but the thing that I couldn't manifest was my health healing, because the negative energy from my trauma was the reason why I had the health issues. And the more that I was trying to manipulate using the idea of commanding demons, which was really just making commitments and contracts with these protector parts of myself to get things that I thought I needed or I thought I wanted so that I could feel safe or worthy. The more that I was doing that, the more I was avoiding the core wounds of my actual trauma. And the core wounds eventually caught up to me. And then that put me in resonance with developing mold toxicity, which is nature's natural decaying mechanism, death mechanism. And just keep in mind, during this time in my life, a lot of this stuff was unconscious to me. And I've always had a good heart. So I've always wanted to heal and I always wanted to improve and know myself. It's just that I was uneducated and I was quite unaware of what I was really doing for a pretty large portion of the process there. And it's not to say that I didn't do wonderful things and I didn't have amazing experiences. And I don't regret any of it, by the way. But I'm just being as vulnerable and as transparent as I can now, because I'm sure there's probably quite a few of you that might resonate with this and potentially learn something from this. But this is what was going on. So the fact that I was so willing to want to know myself, I also feel played a role in me developing the mold issue the way that I did, because that was my fast track to self-discovery. Had I not had the mold poisoning, my life would have been completely different than what it is right now in this moment. I would have kept going down that same road that I was going down. I would have probably been a mainstream occultist talking about all these things that are, just kind of maybe feeding on trauma responses. And I wouldn't have done it because I wanted to hurt people. It was just, that's where I was in regards to my self-awareness and my nervous system. So this whole health thing literally changed my life for the better. And it helped me to actually slowly but surely see who I really am. So long story short, as I said, suddenly, when it came to improving my health, my spirit guides were not able to help me with that. So this was the beginning of me really sensing maybe these spirit guides aren't what I think they are. And that really supported me to take a step back from it. Because remember, as I said, the more I was trying to connect with my spirit guides to help improve my health, the worse my health was actually getting, which was mind-blowing to me. Makes sense now, because obviously the more I'm depending on these spirit guides, these protector parts of me, to improve my health, when the whole purpose of these parts is to keep me away from my core wounds, which is actually preventing me from healing, it makes complete sense now. Okay? So, it was about 2024, after I had taken a big break from doing all of the consistent invocations that I was, during, for all those previous years that I was doing it. This is when my nervous system started to kind of move into a state where I went from really dark, like edgy, borderline narcissistic personality. That was kind of that repressed anger and rage that really drove me into the darker occults. For those of you that don't know, I grew up in a home where there was narcissism, and that really took a toll on my system. And the way that I was raised was, if I'm not behaving in those narcissistic ways, then I won't be able to survive. So it felt like I had to be that way just to survive. So as I said, that energy drove me down into the darker occult. And then now that I was taking a step away from it, 2023-ish, it's like my energy flipped to the other side. And this is where I kind of started becoming much more of a people pleaser and much more of a, I need to fix you so that I can feel safe or that I can feel worthy as a human. So if I can help you or fix you or make you feel good, then that makes me feel good. That makes me feel worthy. Not from a balanced place, but from a place where it's dependent. And this was a very different energy than what I have been used to the previous years. But having almost lost my physical life in the early stage of 2023, that was enough of a trauma within itself to flip my energy. So I think internally, the way that I registered that was this old identity, the more aggressive, angry, semi-narcissistic personality, I internalized that part of me as almost killing me. So subconsciously, I wanted to distance myself from that part of me as much as I could. So then my nervous system switched into a completely different state, which, as I said, was more people-pleasing, more I make you feel good so that I can feel good. I'm going to help you step into your power and step into your light so that I can feel safe. So it's like I went from being this really dark magician occultist to now almost being what people would refer to as a light worker, a healing light worker. And, that energy did really well for me, during the time that it did. And I had the pleasure of working with tons of different people from all over the world in regards to one-on-one calls and mentorships and support people with their spirituality and their trauma healing. I mean, it was and is such a pleasure to have gone through that experience. But it still wasn't me being my fullest self. And I could feel during this time, like when I was in this, what I would refer to as opposite energy of more of the light worker, because it was from a place of still being dissociated and not being fully embodied. And also because it was coming from a place of resisting my old identity, I noticed a pattern. And the pattern was I kept attracting familiar energy that reflected my previous identity. So I kept attracting clients and even friends and even a partnership, a more intimate-based partnership that was a direct reflection of my older self, the self that I literally just kind of stepped away from. And the reason why I kept manifesting that is because I didn't fully process it and integrate it and release it in a healthy way. I more so almost lost my life, got traumatized from that and then repressed it and then switched to another side. Okay? This is very important to notice. So I want you to really pay attention to this because this is very oftentimes the inner psychology and the inner mechanics of why people are going from New Age spirituality or occultism and they're jumping into religion or Jesus following. It's this exact similar type of psychology that I went through that I'm describing now, where you surface trauma, from what you're working with. So in my case, working with the darker occult, especially the clip-off, that opened up doors to my trauma that I had no idea that I was actually opening. When that trauma came up to the surface, I didn't have the foundation or the capacity to actually process it the way that I needed to. So it actually manifested as health issues through mold poisoning. So my nervous system was in resonance for nature's natural way of decaying something, which is mold. So whenever you have mold poisoning or mold toxicity or mold issues, it is a clear indication you are needing to die to something organically. You're needing to release an identity. You're needing to release attachments. You're needing to understand what's going on in your body, emotionally speaking, and what have you been resisting. But as I said, I got the mold poisoning. That was a very traumatizing experience for the time that it lasted. From start to finish of the mold journey, the symptoms really started to kick in mid 2021, and the symptoms ended mid 2023. So it was basically a little bit over 2 years that I dealt with that. There's nothing that was as scary as that, to be honest. But that trauma of everything that had came up and me not knowing how to process it and then getting the health issue was enough to sort of scare me away from what I was doing. And I have a lot of compassion for myself in that too, because trust me, when you're working with darker entities and all that kind of stuff, and then next thing you know, you have a health issue to the point where you literally think you may die, and it actually looks that way, like you may actually die. It brings you to a place of realizing, maybe I'm not seeing something here, or maybe I'm making a mistake. So that was enough for me to, and it wasn't so conscious, it was more of like a subconscious fear, because I'm a very stubborn person too. So to admit that I had fear of the occult was not something that I would do. And it's not that I really I guess the best way to describe it is it was like a subconscious fear for everything that had just happened to me. So that's what also promoted, once again, me shifting my energy into the complete opposite state of like a light worker almost. And so as you can see, the heaviness and the emotional surfacing from what I was working with was so much and too much for my capacity that it caused me to want to run from it by switching to another polarity or switching to another identity, another form of coping that was opposite of the previous. And that's what I thought was going to heal me, or that's what I thought was going to fix me. Once again, a lot of this was subconscious and unconscious. I was obviously not conscious that this is what I was doing at the time, but looking back, I can see this. So as I'm in this new energy, this new state, this new vibration of love and light and healing the inner child all the time, that was like the main essence. I was also repressing this other part of me that I just left. And that's why I kept manifesting it over and over and over again as a shadow. So it became at this point in my process, once again, kind of like mid 2023, where it started to feel like there was darker forces that were against me. Now, when we look at this from a religious perspective, this means the demons and the devil is trying to pull you back to hell. They're trying to pull you back to the darkness. And now, since you are a Christian or you're a Jesus follower, you are protected and you just have to stay true to your path. That's the religious lens of how people will interpret this. And a lot of people that switch from New Age to Christianity or to Jesus, this is their approach. They view it in this way because it supports what they're repressing. So obviously, I never did that because the word is I'm too wise to do that. I actually, in the moment of me feeling what I was feeling at the time, being in this new state, feeling like there's darker energies that are trying to pull me down, I was conscious enough to realize that is not true. I was conscious enough to know that there are parts of me that are experiencing it as that way, but I was also conscious enough to notice this is also a part of me. The energy that I'm feeling like is after me or trying to pull me down is just a part of me too. And that's stuff that I learned from working with the darker occult. For the time that I worked with the darker occult, I got so comfortable and so normalized with darker energies and with entities. And that was one of the biggest gifts and the biggest values I've ever received when it came to spirituality and my sense of existence in this everyday life here on earth as a human. Because I grew up with a lot of religious trauma and a lot of religious indoctrination that made me feel there was always a devil out to get me. And that was a lot of fear. So going into the occult the way that I did, I was able to really undo that fear by becoming quote unquote friends or companions with these negative, darker entities that so many people are terrified of. Now, remember, these entities were reflections of parts of me too. So it's inherently building relationships with these demons was actually also building relationships with some of my own parts of me that really needed that connection and needed that attention. Now, that darker path didn't really have the resolve that I was looking for in regards to having a more balanced approach from a place of being a leader or a parent to these parts of me. The darker path helped me to bridge the gap of becoming companions with these parts, but then sort of allowing these parts to tell me what I should be doing and how I should be doing it, not knowing that it was these parts of me that were just trying to protect me from my deeper core wounds. So long story short, when my energy switched to the other side, I could sense it. I could sense I know that this is a part of me that is resurfacing in my life now. And that has this feeling that it's a dark energy. I know that's not, I know it's not something attacking me. It just feels that way. But it was also at this time where it felt the most enticing to just grab onto Jesus. I remember this 100% in my process. There was a moment where I'm like, I wonder if I work with the energy of Jesus, or if I start following Jesus in a sense, if that will get rid of this negative feeling. And in some ways, there's truth to that, because the whole religion that surrounds Jesus following, or even Jesus worship, is based on, oftentimes good and evil. So if I subscribe to that belief system, then that means I'm also subscribing to the fact that good and evil is real. And that now gives me more of a position to be able to resist or fight against this darker energy. So there was a part of me that was enticed to do that. But remember, I'm way too aware and I'm too conscious to let myself do that. So I knew this. I could sense this inner conflict of a part of me wanted to grab on to Christianity more so from the Jesus lens. And then this other part of me was also like, but that that's not true, and you have to face me. So it was literally like a very profound inner conflict that I was experiencing, where I'm just continuously manifesting from my deeper repressed unconscious, and I'm trying to find a solution to try to mitigate that negative energy of what I was manifesting. This was it. This was the inner mechanics and the inner psychology of exactly what this looks like in my body and in a lot of people's system that will swap from New Age to religion or to Jesus following. Okay, so once again, this is really valuable stuff to sit with and to actually process. Because as you can see, you can't run from the darkness of your old self or of what you're repressing. You can't run from it. So even though you try to switch to a new belief system or a new paradigm that comes with a community of people that are fighting against darkness and are siding with the truth, that will never solve what's actually going on. Because in essence, there's nothing to truly solve. There's only acceptance and surrender and actual processing. So once again, with the whole world, with a large portion of people in today's collective going from New Age to Jesus following, they're trying to find a solution to the problem. They're still looking for a new solution, yet that step is a little bit better than the previous. So even when I was starting to become more of this kind of like people-pleasing, light worker type of energy to me, that felt healthier than the previous energy that I was already coming from, which was a little bit more controlling, manipulative, and even narcissistic. So this other energy was an improvement from that, but it still wasn't who I actually am. So there's a lot of people, once again, that are experiencing an improvement when they turn to Jesus, because Jesus can represent that authentic self within based on all of the different qualities that Jesus emanated and things like that. But then when you have the entire belief system that surrounds Christianity with this idea of good and evil and Satan and God and all this other jargon, this is where you get yourself into dark waters and you're continuing to suppress your trauma because you're now starting to ascribe subconsciously evil to the parts of you that actually need to be seen, worked with, and integrated. And it just becomes easier to keep those parts at bay because you think you're fighting evil or you think you're, getting attacked by forces that want to hurt you. When in truth, there's none of that is real. None of that is actually happening because you are a source of your reality. You are a microcosmic manifestation of the source itself, which means you play a major role in the exact reality that you are currently co-creating and attracting to yourself. So if you're creating a reality where there are evil forces attacking you, you're creating it. Because I can guarantee you, there are millions of other humans on this planet now that are not living in that reality. And it comes down to beliefs, and those beliefs are rooted in repressed traumas, negative energy, which holds the nervous system in more of a negative state, and then you co-create and attract from the nervous system resonance, which also most likely becomes a part of your belief system. So many people are creating realities where they are being attacked or they are being suppressed and repressed by external things completely separate from them, when in truth, it's not actually happening. It's just parts of themselves they haven't built relationships with yet or haven't become conscious of yet. So, as I said, I remember during my process where it became really enticing to want to make that jump, but I also was too aware to do that because I'm like, no, that makes no sense. So I was the observer of what was going on in that regard. Now, eventually, since I was driving that state that I was in, that more codependent, people-pleasing, light-working, overly empath state, what ended up happening is I went through a serious abandonment and betrayal from the person that I was dating and my closest friend at the time. And I had actually manifested these people into my life in 2023 when I was in that state already. So when I had shifted my energy into this new state, that's when I manifested and attracted these people into my life that then led to me getting completely abandoned and betrayed, which was the exact core wounds that I was not wanting to face and process from the very start. So the whole trauma that was underneath the surface for all of these different identities that I've experienced, these two primarily that I'm sharing in this video, the one that went into the dark occult and then the one that came out of it, there was a serious hurt of feeling abandoned and feeling betrayed and feeling like a general sense of unworthiness and shame that was under all of it. That was the core wounds. And flipping my energy to the opposite pole, I thought was going to fix me. I thought was going to solve the problem, but it didn't. It was only perpetuating what was actually under the surface, which was much deeper rooted. And that caught up to me. And when I went through that betrayal and that abandonment, that was extremely traumatizing, but at the same time, exactly what I needed to experience to remember this is not who I am, and this is what happens when you're being inauthentic, or this is what happens when you are not being who you really are. When you're running from yourself, it's only a matter of time until yourself catches back up with you. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing when you allow it to happen. So that was the beginning stages of me. This was the end of 2024, was the beginning stages of me really seeing my authentic self again and realizing, oh my gosh, this is what I've been afraid to embody. This is like, this level of my vulnerability is what I've been running from. And it was really sad to see that, and quite profound to realize, like, this whole time under the surface was me. And I was just afraid to let go and to work on being that, or to practice just being this more vulnerable, authentic version of myself. And as I said, that started a whole new journey forward of self-commitment. Okay. So here I am, a little bit over a year from when I had that big realization, and I can see all of these things that I've gone through in my recent past with a lot more clarity and a lot more understanding. And here I am sharing it with you now for those of you that can really receive this information and hopefully get something from it. All right. So this is going to wrap it up. Once again, I feel like I really shared everything I needed to when it comes to understanding this whole going from New Age to Jesus. All right. So if you're looking for a community of like-minded people that are doing the real inner work, first link below. I encourage you to join. You can request, and then I'll add you in as long as you're a good fit. Second link is where you can book one-on-one calls, or you can book mentorships, and I would be honored to connect with you in any way that I can to support your process where you feel like you might need that support. So when it comes to trauma healing, that's what I specialize in, specifically with helping you to create a foundation that will regulate your nervous system to co-create and attract the life that is truly most fulfilling for you. Okay? Tier number 3 is the Patreon. I have an entire trauma course from start to finish. I highly recommend you look into that. And then tier number 3 is the nervous system healing ritual that is happening this month. So if you want to participate in this, a very transformative catalyst, it's only for people that are really taking their process to that deeper level with a deeper level of self-commitment. But if that's you, I would be honored to be a part of it with you. All right, we're going to wrap it up here. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day or night, wherever you are, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.